Hi, my name is Rose Sumaya, and this is a presentation on better understanding students with attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD. So we are going to discuss the three types of ADHD: predominantly inattentive type, predominantly hyperactive impulse type, and then the most common type, which is the combination of those two. So with the predominantly inattentive type, the signs and symptoms are sometimes harder to observe than the other type. So difficulty paying attention, students making mistakes that maybe their peers do not make, having trouble following a conversation or just hearing what a person has said to them, organizing their items and tasks is a big part of school and is difficult for this type. Sustaining focus and remembering tasks, also a big deal. So on the next slide, we'll talk about what that looks like with this type. So as I said on the signs and symptoms slide, it sometimes is hard to notice when an inattentive type is struggling with ADHD because it doesn't present the way you would assume ADHD to present, because we all think of hyperactive impulse type when we think of someone that has ADHD, or maybe that is an old idea, but that's the way I have been taught to think of it. So this type is not as disruptive as the hyperactive impulse type because, like I said, it's an internal situation, but these students might seem like they're working slower or having trouble moving from one task to another. They might seem like they're a bored student, or maybe they are a student that may seem unmotivated. And sometimes they have anxiety or other mood disorders, and this can partially be because it's hard for them to socially interact as part of the inattentive type. So with the predominantly hyperactive impulse type, the signs and symptoms are more outward, external facing, and can be easier to observe. Students will have trouble staying in their seats, trouble with fidgeting, keeping their hands still, feet still, keeping them to themselves. They might interrupt, they might blurt out an answer, or have trouble waiting in line or taking their turn, and have trouble being quiet when the activity uh, needs that sort of focus. So then we come to the combined type, like as I had said before, is the most common type, where the hyperactive impulse is married with the inattentive type. Um, so basically you will have your students, not only will they be exhibiting the external signs of keeping their hand, not able to keep their hands to themselves, and fidgeting, and just, being hyper, but they will also be having the inattentive types, or inattentive problems, where they are unable to focus and follow a conversation, keep track of different things. So they combine to cause a twofold problem for a student. So you may wonder what this looks like with ADHD. So 7 to 10% of US students are receiving services related to ADHD, and there has been a 30% increase in that diagnosis since the 1990s. So according to IDEA 2004, the category that these students are placed under is other health impairments. So there's not technically a category for students that have ADHD to be categorized and get the help that they need. In that category, says that the student has limited strength, vitality, or alertness, which can include a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli, resulting in limited alertness with respect to educational environments. So I think it's a natural question to ask why we're seeing an increase in numbers of ADHD, especially when a student may not even necessarily qualify for services. But the reasons why there's an increase is because with the Affordable Care Act, there has been better access to health care. So students um, are able to go to the doctor and find out if that's what they're dealing with. And as a side note, that means that more um, minority students are being diagnosed with ADHD than they previously were. And same with girls, even though it's not at the same rate as boys are being diagnosed, but there is an uptick of girls being diagnosed as well. And from the article that I read, that has to do with the access to better health care. Also, there is a better understanding of ADHD by the doctors and the public. So I think that means there's an increased awareness that it is a problem that children and adults alike can suffer from. And so just having that knowledge that it is out there as a possibility why someone might be having a hard time um, and having those people go ask to be diagnosed basically and get looked at is increasing the numbers. And so there's also new standards for diagnosis because um, there's new tests to find out how if a student is actually suffering from ADHD or not. They're not going by, oh, well, it seems like you're, not able to sit still, so you must have ADHD, but they're going a little bit deeper. And then the big question is there an overdiagnosis? I think ever since I was a kid back in the 90s, there has always been talk about, oh, they're just overdiagnosing ADHD. Every kid has, every kid has trouble sitting still, but now everyone wants to go to the doctor and get medicine for it. And while the article that I read basically says that that is not really true, but there is a possibility that it is true because in the United States we have diagnoses of ADHD at a much higher rate than any other country in the world. So it definitely could be due to an overdiagnosis situation and possibly different standards. So anyway, so that's why there's an increase in numbers, and it's good to kind of have a good understanding of why that is occurring. So it's important to remember that with ADHD, it's not a difference in intellect, it's just a difference in achievement. Students across the board with ADHD, they range in all levels of IQ, so from low to high. Just as many gifted students have ADHD as don't. So it's very important to not assume that a student is not smart enough. It's just a matter of the way the brain works and learns in those situations. So ways that we can help put interventions in to help a whole class or just students with ADHD. One is called errorless learning, which means that instead of giving students an opportunity to to give any answer possible, you can help guide them to the correct answer, so that way they don't remember falsely an answer. So that doesn't mean that you have to tell them the exact answer, but you do help them by, suggesting a partial answer or pointing to an answer. There's verbal and physical cues that you can do. Also, you can improve students with ADHD, their focus by giving flex time between activities, so a student has an opportunity to finish what they're working on, or maybe they need to move on more quickly because the previous task isn't interesting them. Um, so there's that, and then giving students more time to complete a test, or rolling deadlines. Figure out what works for your students. Don't just assume everything works for every student. Um, so yeah, so it's important just to really understand your students, and to know that not every student, even if all your students had ADHD, it's not going to look the same, and the same things that work for one student aren't going to work for another necessarily. So just as you would with your average student, you want to be able to give them the opportunity to learn in ways that make sense for them, and you could even incorporate differentiated learning into that as well. So anyway, it's good to know about ADHD, especially with it being diagnosed more frequently, and um, you know, needing to be a partner to parents and to students alike.